Howdy there, folks. Chris McLean back with yet another episode. And today in the studio, I've got Jane from Upstride Agency. And they're a social impact agency that works with the public sector, health and community organizations, environment groups, and not-for-profits. They create unforgettable stories, memorable experiences, and unmissable messages that inspire people into positive action. And they do this to help those who work to make our lives better. Jane, sounds like a big important mission that you've got. Thanks for jumping on the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Chris. It's really nice to be here with you today, and hello to everyone who's taking the time to listen in as well. Yeah, so thank you for the intro. That's right. We're sort of a 3-year-old now social impact creative agency with a bit of a focus on content, because that's really my background. I started and I've spent most of my career as a journalist. So I think that's certainly somewhere where we tap into a lot, but also I've had a lot of experience as a digital director. And so we pull in those different streams as well. So while we're small, we can offer a lot of services, but we kind of kick to the content end too.
Yeah, okay. And the positivity, the sort of that positive good for the world, was that something that obviously that's important to you? Was that something that you've always sort of had that side of things, or is that something that's sort of come about over the last few years? Sort of why the focus on sort of not-for-profits and doing good for the world, other than the fact that it's nice to do good things for the world? What took you down that avenue?
Yeah, I suppose as a journalist, you really do see all walks of life. You know, I was with News Corp for many years, and from everything from like reporting, you know, in schools to courts, and you really do see, I suppose, the impact of how difficult life can be for some people that really do deserve an easier road, but also the importance of public policy decision making, I suppose, on people's lives and the progress of that for them, their families now, but for intergenerational change. And so really, when I was a journalist, I worked a fair bit in politics and really enjoyed that side of things. And then from there, I did go and work in government departments and got even a little bit more into that public policy, but from the comms perspective, doing media, as most ex-journos do. And then really in public service, what happens is you go in one area, you end up inheriting all of these other areas, and then suddenly you've got a website to run and an intranet and school, different email channels and marketing things and campaigns. And so that was a bit of an organic flow for me. But really, when I went out on my own, I knew that's kind of where I saw such an impact on people's lives from these things that really, I suppose, not too many of us give too much thought to. And it was really, really important to me to do that. And so that's kind of what brought me into that social impact space.
Yeah, super, super important. There's people out there to support organizations that are, you said, trying to do good things in communities, and so the health sector, environment groups, not-for-profits. Do you have a, social impacts are obviously a big area. Do you have, is there something that's closer to your heart? Is it more the people side? Is it the planet side? Is it kind of a bit of everything? Is there something that's a bit closer to the heart for you than the other?
Yeah, I think we do a lot of work in health, and I think everyone's seen the importance of public health messaging over the last couple of years. So that's certainly kind of taken a fair bit of focus, but also, environment, certainly we do a lot of work, and I love working with the environment department. We've done a lot of different jobs with them that have gone really well, really enjoy that. And then not-for-profits. So there's some that I've had a personal connection to, which have been sort of one of my clients now, and others that not at all. So it just really sort of depends on, I suppose, who comes knocking and where we go chasing. And sometimes the paths align, and sometimes we might miss each other in the night, and that's okay too. But yeah, so it's a kind of a bit of a full gamut, but we probably do a lot of community type, so health things, foster care type things. We do a lot in that space, or obviously the COVID stuff, but that goes without saying. A lot of like things around parenting or domestic violence, in addition to environment type stuff as well. So yeah.
So you're running sort of the full digital suite there. Is it sort of thinking around it? Is it sort of campaign based promotional sort of pieces rather than sort of SEO and website build? Is it that sort of more pushing individual campaign pieces out? And is it what does that look like in terms of channels? And so I think that's quite a different aspect to sort of marketing, and a lot of agencies can focus on websites and SEO and PPC campaigns, but this sort of has a different feel to it.
Yeah, that's right. And often we'll partner with some of those more specialised agencies as well. So, for example, there's a project client up in Queensland that we're working with now, and we're doing the content piece, but I'm working pretty much most seconds of the day. We are with a special UX team up in Sydney from another agency, another brand studio. So we do a bit of that where we collaborate a fair bit with those more specialised agencies. But we also do sometimes we will do our own web builds and UX pieces and app design and things like that as well. It just depends on, I suppose, who the client is and what they're after and the scope of their project. But often, I suppose the bulk of our work, or what people will know us for, would be those fundraising campaigns and also public health campaigns. So we do the Red Nose Day campaign, which is like a full stack campaign. So that goes from everything from TVCs right through to, the media pitching, the social media, that sort of thing, and the whole fundraising piece. And then Donate Life Week is another one, which is federal government. And that's the PR side, the media piece is a bit of media buying. So we do a little bit of that. But also, we do a few other things as well. So, I'll have a meeting after this on a brand strategy job, and then pure content pieces and writing, technical writing, those sorts of things. So it could be completely different, pure social campaigns. It does just depend. And I think at the start, when I started out, I thought, I should specialise. And even though I started as a journalist, I suppose my career before Upstride progressed towards more down the digital route. So I thought, maybe I'll just be a digital agency. But I really missed the PR side of what I thought that I had a lot of skills, in this space as well.
Yeah. Right.
And so sort of it took me back a few years, back to more my journalism days. But I'll often we'll bring in a bit of a digital spin on those campaigns too, like a bit of AR or VR, sometimes things like that, where I feel pretty comfortable in those spaces, which is good. And then we have, our media person and other people sort of doing that stuff. So we kind of all bring our skills together like that. So it is, even though we're small, we can still do those other things as well, or we'll partner on those bigger projects as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You got, obviously, what you do particularly is so much about, as you sort of mentioned in the at the start of the show, it's all really about that storytelling and providing an insight into that experience of that person, right, of that group, of that community that might be doing it hard or struggling. It's really about that emotional connection. And as you're saying, you've now got genuinely immersive tech like VR and AR and AI and the metaverse coming through, all this kind of stuff, right? So you're able to tell that story in many different places. How do you sort of find that? As you said, that's quite natural for you to do a press release and build a VR experience. How do you sort of build that? Is that the same story? Is there sort of syncopation between? Is there differences between telling stories in those different channels, do you find?
No, it's just maybe just a different way of telling those stories. Certainly the same as, to me, if it's an AR piece or if it's a video, it's all about what the best way is with connecting with, the person that you're trying to connect with, and often change behaviour or for fundraising, raise funds, etc. And so how are they going to be engaged? And so sometimes people do come to us, we want a podcast. And, that happens a lot. And our job is to try and go, hey, but maybe you don't want a podcast. Maybe you want X, Y, Z or something else, wherever your people are. So we try and take people a bit of a step back from those sorts of things. And there's absolutely place for tech, deep tech, all of those things in the right projects, but that's not all of the projects. And sometimes, and it really is just really dependent on the audience. And so if we're working across sort of multiple campaigns and different audience groups, the needs are just so completely different. What a Facebook group might be doing over here, is just like killing it, whereas that would just not even be thought of in another space. So it's all about TikTok or something like that.
Yeah.
So it is really horses for courses, but as I think storytelling is so important in the visual medium, in the interactive mediums, and everything. You have to have people that can identify what a really strong, good story is. And I think where people do that is by really listening to clients and listening to people in your ecosystem and your peers and mentors, and to really just, we can all get so caught up in what this new tech is, and me as well, but what this new tech is, or these cool trends and things like that, but really stopping and taking the time to listen to everyone, to really understand people's needs, and then to go from there. And I think often, because we're all so busy and we're trying to rush to this next sort of task or project, that sometimes that gets really lost. But that's like one of our sort of standards, we call them here, you might call them values or something, is to listen hard. And that is really where we try and bring a lot of value to our clients that we work with, by really trying to hear what they're saying and decipher that into what the possibilities are, which might not be the possibilities they thought, but to work with them to understand the ecosystems that they're working within as well, which are in these organizations. Like, we don't work with consumer brands, for example, but they're hugely complex organizations with often most of my clients will have many thousands of people in their organizations, so the stakeholder management and just trying to get people along on a shared journey. And these are not-for-profits as well. I mean, they sound nice, like charities, not-for-profits, but some of these, they're big. They're on the top 50 business list, in Australia. They're really complex internal ecosystems with many different internal ideas. And so you've got to really understand what their needs are and how they differ, how you can bring people along with a journey. And I think that's sort of the first place where we like to start. And that's a throwback to sort of my journalism days, which I thought taught me really well, because I think I sort of jumped ahead from that. And then I was one of those busy people for many, many years. And then I kind of just stepped back and you can see I'm having a coffee and working whenever. And
chilling now.
That sort of thing. You chill a bit more and a different approach, which, if you just listen harder, you can work a lot smarter. So that's kind of what the philosophy that we're trying to work with these days in this ever fluid environment that we are in work-wise.
Yeah. I was going to ask. I assume that capability, that skill set of listening, would have come from your journalistic days, right? A lot of imagine in journalism, you really have to listen to get to the essence of, what's the story, what's the angle, how we're going to communicate and tell this story. Did you find that skill set was something you sort of built through having that journalism background particularly?
Definitely, 100%, because that listening then leads you to ask the right questions, and then often not the questions that, you're being asked often, I think. And so if we can identify what those right questions are, then often we can come up with a better solution to answer, to help the client solve their problem or address the problem while we're there, what they're trying to solve. And so, very much of that comes back from journalism. And I know people say when I left journalism, I think it was 9 years ago now, something, oh, wow, because that industry kind of imploded for a little while, but now it's really broadening out again and saying, oh, this industry will be dead and it must be good foresight and a good time to leave. But absolutely not. I think the role of a storyteller has just become more and more important. And it doesn't matter if you're in journalism or not, although journalism is building back up. The skills that journalists have are just they're able to be multiplied across so many different things that we do as a creative person, not just in text-based content, but in visual, in multimedia and interactive and everything. And so I really think the ability to tell a good story in among all of the busyness of the world and all of the stories that are out there is just so important to get cut through for our clients and to, you know, meet what they're trying to achieve. It's just absolutely critical that you get those good stories, and how you get them. It's not just, you don't always have something presented to you on a plate. It's that listening and that questioning, that right line of questioning. Sometimes you won't always get the right answers, of course. Like, you know, I spent a long time as a court reporter, even back in those gangland days of the Carl Williams telling me what to write and all of that. Don't worry about that. So
interesting times.
You've got to be on the lookout. You've got to have your guard up a bit too, because I think you know, as a person, I've sort of learned I'm quite trustworthy. Like, I would say maybe naive a little bit. I've always been someone that always believes the best of people, which I suppose is a personality trait that's taken to me where I am. But that is not always the case with people's motives. So you've got to sort of be a bit more on the alert as well. And it's helped me become a bit more decisive, I suppose, over the years. So I think certainly lately I really try to step back, stop, listen, kick back a bit, take things in, and hopefully I do feel that works for me a lot better than just rushing along to the next thing.
So you sort of learn to become a bit more discerning about maybe your truth filters, right? We're talking truth filters a bit like that, how you filter that information and discern what's correct, what's accurate, what's right for this particular piece or this audience or this narrative, right? So, and I think that's another really critical skill, because there's so much information out in the world. There's so much data. There's so much stuff that we have to filter through. Having like a really good truth filter is really important, and particularly in journalism, because there's journalistic integrity and all that kind of stuff. You have to be you've got to have some semblance of like a truth or a filter to say this is appropriate or not. But then that applies to us as agency owners, right? As marketers. What is the truth of this thing? What is the piece that I'm going to tease out to tell this story, so that it's true, it's authentic, it's coming from the right place for this message, for this audience to, as you say, you're there to inspire people to take action. And a lot of the times we have to trigger that action, right? We've got to trigger that action from stuff like this. Like, what is that thing that's I'm going to hear that message, it's going to resonate, and I'm going to go, great, I'm ready to take action, I'm ready to move forward on this thing. So I think that's really another really important skill set to build as a marketer and a storyteller, is that how do you discern what's appropriate for that person at that time on that channel in the context of that channel. So can be quite complex, but I think I find storytelling really interesting, and like everyone wants to be a storyteller, and we talk about telling stories. Do you have a process for how do you take all of this stuff, discern what's right, and then tell that story? Because it's easy to say, oh, we tell stories, but what does that process look like? How do you actually go about telling a story? I mean, having a start, middle, and an end in a classic kind of storytelling way. How do you find that, the emotional triggers? How do you go about actually taking information and turning it into something that's compelling to make me take action on something?
Yeah, that's right. It always depends on obviously who we're working with and the scale of the project. So often, I would say in most cases, we literally are picking up the phone and acting like journalists, just speaking with the people who might be out there talking as a spokesperson, or might be out there, as a case study, for example, for a campaign, just talking with them, getting them to send through photos, videos, highlights. We also do have some templates that we ask them, like story brief templates that we ask them to fill in with key points, those sorts of things, background materials, often photos, and then we can build out stories from there. But it really is looking at sort of the context of what the project is going to do, what's happening in the community at the time, or the society at the time, what those other external triggers are, trigger points, and then putting it all together into a package for that the end user will be able to connect with. So there is that process, and that's the process, I suppose, that you were taught as a cadet journalist before, like the mechanics, the technicals of writing and everything. It's about how you gather information and then how you filter it for what's real. where you're doing the fact checking, depending on if you need to or not. Like for case study things, not so much, but for broader projects or something that might be a little bit more controversial, they're where you bring your fact checking in, and so you corroborate certain stories. And then from there, that's where you build what the story is. As a writer, sometimes when we write, like some of the girls, everyone is different. They'll write top down. I often, if I'm writing something, which is sometimes still these days, like every so often, you know, I usually start in the middle, and then I'll write the top at the end of what I'm writing. And then I'll just sort of find it out that way, and then the intro or the headlines and stuff. So I'll come back to those. And I think that was just the process of, you know, trying to be quick back when I was a journo, because we had so many things to get through. And so that was the way that I would find that, instead of, because if you often get stuck at the start when you're telling a story, I find, and then we're burning time doing that. And as a deadline journal, I couldn't do that, burn time. So I felt like when I was writing the body of what I was doing, I was getting the facts out, sort of getting my brain around what are the main things that people will connect with, and then I'll come back and write at the top. But I know that's certainly not for everyone. But it's the same. I find that works for me. The girls here, they also write it a bit differently, and videographers are subbies that we mostly work with. Some are linear, some are from the bottom up, and I start at the middle. So it's kind of whatever works for you that you know is tried and tested. That works well for me. It means I can be pretty fast because I tend to spend my time in that fact gathering process, that listening and thinking, and then by the time I come to writing something quite quick. But that's, I suppose, because I'm in my very late 30s now, so I've done that technical work for a while. So I feel like I can do that bit quickly, but you can never speed up the fact gathering piece. And the same goes for, I suppose, we're talking about storytelling now, but you were talking about, you know, the truth finding, the fact finding and everything. The same goes for me as a business person, which is probably more of what I would do these days, is then when we're bidding for work, I suppose your other agency owners who are listening to this as well, it's the same process. Like at the start, when I started the agency, I'll just bid for everything, you know. Anything that came in, any tender I was invited to, I'll be, oh, how good's this? To smash out the response, and of course never win. And you just burn all your time on these things, these useless, and then you ring out and they're like, oh, 70 other agencies bid, or this was the open tender. You're like, what? Why have I wasted my time? And so now, to be honest, the more truth finding and fact finding that I would do isn't so much at the end result of that storytelling. It's at the start of what the potential project might be, as is this something that can work for us? And of course I still bid and probably lose definitely most of the tenders, but I will bid for a lot less work these days because of that, just to find out what's going to be right for us, what might not be so right. If there was something we should bid as like a consortium, sometimes I'll do that. But it's just depending. It's that listening to what they have to say. And then I think, you know, often now you come to a good point where it's like, okay, you haven't got enough information, there's not enough coming, so you might not go there. And so I think that's something that's really important when you're running a creative business as well, is like what you let in and what you keep out, because I think so often, particularly, you know, in these times, it's so easy just to, any knock on the door, you're kind of like, oh, this is great. And then you just scramble and make everything happen. And that's just a way to just kill your mental health. And, and you know, you're working at 3 a.m. and you're like, what am I doing? And I think that you've got to be so discerning on who's the right fit and the intent of the clients as well. You know, and what, because sometimes, and it depends, like what your agency stands for. So I have to be very careful who I work with. Like if I want to be social impact, then I'm going to be social impact. So I have to research what these people who are coming to me. I have been approached to do sort of guerrilla marketing stuff before, which I'm a hard no on because of the ethics that we do. So I'm not saying that's not right. For some things it might work really well, but so I have to really look and I'll go through all their annual reports and finances and what they paid in other consultancies and that way. So it's about being discerning at that point, as well as listening really hard and asking the right questions then, because otherwise you'll just burn time. And then in the storytelling, content creation process, it's the same thing at the start, to not burn time, but to get to the right destination for your client.
Yeah, beautiful. I love it. Sort of come full circle on that idea, because I think that's that whole idea of having a truth filter for your business is, as you're saying, is massively important. Of what do I let in? What do I let go? What do I say yes to? Like, as you said, what's a hard no? What's a hard yes? Because particularly as we're getting started as agency owners, as you said, we want to take on everything. But that's a pretty fast track to overwhelm, burnout, frustration, lack of clarity. As much as we just want to get in and get money rolling and get money flowing through the business, that is important. But as we sort of move down the track a bit, becoming more and more discerning about, what's a yes, what's a no, until, as you said, you get to a point where, like, this is a hard yes and this is a hard no. Anything within that is what we do. Anything outside of that, that's not what we're about. So having that truth filter for your business is super, super important, as well as truth filter for messaging and what you're saying.
And for me as well, I see it like it is separate, but I feel like obviously the business was, or probably still is, an extension of me as a person. So for my personal life, then I live by the same. So, for example, I had to get another car because I didn't have a car. I'm a bike rider, but I've got a baby, so I need a car. And so I was like, so I got a hybrid car because, I work a lot with the environment department, but my family in the country, so I couldn't get an electric car that worked, and certainly live in an apartment, so I couldn't have the infrastructure for it, but I could get something that was, still fit within, because I wanted to, it needs to be representative. So the agency is representative. I think it works together of me as a person. And so, it's about kind of presenting who you really are through the business as well. As well as in my personal life. So I think, everyone just sees me as one of the same. Most people call me Jane in work and at home.
I think it's another really important point, is to feel aligned and authentic about what you're doing as a business owner, right? And I think that has a lot of really positive on-flow into sales and marketing, and how we talk about our business and how confident we are with the business and how we feel selling, right? When you know that you're aligned and you're on mission and you're on value, you can that whole sales process becomes more about enrolling people into something really good for them and good for the business and good for the planet and good for people, rather than selling somebody on a product or selling on a service. So I think that's kind of one of the sort of on-flow effects of having that authentic alignment to you. Just show up as who you are, and you sort of attract people into your business, and then you've got that truth filter to say, do we want to work with this client or not? Yes, no, yes, okay, great, everything's aligned. And personalities, there's less personality conflict, all that kind of good stuff kind of flows on as a positive effect of limiting your scope, right?
100%. And I just think that's so important, because I wouldn't rock up to the environment department in a full fuel car, and I wouldn't want them to come to me in a tractor, like, so it makes sense like that. But I think it's trying to be representative, authenticity. It's a lot of what we talk about, but also it's also reflective of society. And so we have, like, our grad here, she's English as a second language, and so she's from Africa. And I suppose when you're working with cold and you have cold staff, like everyone says, cultural diversity, and but then when clients, they might worry about the writing or things like that, and there's a whole other kettle of fish that we can talk about there, if you like, about sort of the cultural diversity of agencies, and then dealing with that sort of thing. Did you want me to talk a little bit about that, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's there's a lot more, obviously living in Melbourne, in Australia in general. It's a very multicultural environment, so we do have very, very inclusive workplaces. But yeah, what do you find is that there an expectation there that written language and that sort of thing is not going to be the best from someone who's not Australian? Is that sort of where you're taking it
sometimes there? Or maybe like if we're doing media work, people might say, oh, I can't understand you, or things like that. And so we still come up a fair bit of those. And often the other girls and I might have to do more of the text writing for our employee who is English second language, but she's just so amazing at absolutely phenomenal at creativity, verbal, and bringing people along with the journey. And I think that is something that's been really eye-opening for me, like seeing someone who's doing PR, like at the interface, and what she comes up against as well, and then how our clients interact with her. It's so important for me to see that they're supportive of that as well, because I think it's so difficult for people who've come to Australia from another country to get a go as well, and especially if you're in a writing profession and your English is a second language, it's really hard and you're really up against it. And we've come up a bit of racism from people, and I can't understand you and things like that. Often I'm like, what do you mean? When they're speaking, perfect
it's not
English
that hard.
with a strong accent, and so these sorts of things do surprise me a bit day to day, but I think it's really important, again, because we talked about, a hybrid car is one thing, how people interact, with diverse employees is another thing, and how you work around them and their needs. And we do, we're doing an Indigenous project as well at the moment, and the lead on that is an Indigenous person. There's been some deaths in the families. Well, that whole thing stops for sorry business. So everything just stops. We don't even ring, we just hands off. But that's very difficult in a in like the white Caucasian sense of creative business here and our timelines and things like this and this, where then you're just like, oh, and who knows when things are going to be back starting. But you got to, I think that's something when you work in social impact, it's really important because communities are so diverse these days to realize it's not just working with people to be like, oh, we're diverse. It's like, no, you're working in a whole other way of working, and that I think is another thing for people to process, that's really important to me, because I think as a country and as a community, as a creative community, we've got to get better at this. Like, we've just got to get better. And there's still so much division there, and I suppose we're in the arts per se, and we have a real role to play in leading this, but there's still so many different divides. Like, for example, on particular projects where there's a cultural stream or an Indigenous stream, if we're bidding for a grant or something like that, often the grants are separate. They're separated between an Indigenous stream and a non-Indigenous stream. You can't even put in, even if you're working together as a team, you have to present yourself as separately to get these grants, and just Indigenous. And this is in like creative, this is in the arts and things like that. And so I think when you get into it, like when you're at it at the coalface like we are in that, with that sort of diversity, you see inherent problems in how the creative ecosystem is set up from the start to create work. And then you can see where there's opportunities for improvement, and there's so many like people, good intentions and stuff out there, but there's still so many silly points of division that I think there's a long way to go.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear you talk about that in tail end of 2021 with literally 2021 still talking about division and diversity and racial inequality inside something like social impact organizations, which are literally supposed to be the face of inclusion and ethical treatment, all that stuff. So yeah, I find that fascinating that you're on the coalface and you're seeing that there is still that. There's a genuine division even for organizations that are essentially leading the charge, right? Supposedly leading the charge of social inclusion, that there's still a lot of division and siloing that happens there. So really fascinating.
It's not intentional. It's a lot of it isn't intentional. You know, it's trying to do the right thing. But I think from what we see and some of the stuff we're working on is that it's probably
it ends up coming off the other way.
Yeah, there's a long way to go for a lot of this stuff, and we're just kind of at the start of this. Right. And I think that there's a long way to go for the industry in that space. So it'll be really interesting to see over the next couple of years how that all pans out. Like, inroads are being made, but yeah, there's definitely a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can get there. I'm sure we could continue to rap about this for the next hour or so. But yeah, thank you. So there's a lot of really interesting insights on particularly that sort of social impact, community and environment and stuff that's happening there, as well as everything else we've managed to get through in this powerful 30 odd minutes or so. Thank you so much, Jane, for dropping by. If people want to connect with you, learn more about this, learn more about the agency, reach out to you if they're looking for help with that sort of social impact side of things, where are some of the best places for people to come and get connected with you?
Yeah, they can just jump on our website. So that's upstride.com.au. That's UPS for Sam, TRIDE.com.au, and you'll find me there, or just jane@upstride.com.au is my email address.
Fantastic. And as always, I'll drop those links in the show notes so the folks at home can click on those and get connected with you. Real super interesting stuff. Thank you so much for dropping by. It's interesting to hear from people that are at the coalface, as you said, of this stuff, and that's where you find the reality of things. So appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us about that sort of social impact side of things and how you see that side of the world operating. It's been very, very insightful. Enjoyed having you on. I'm sure everyone at home sort of got some really good insights about again around that whole storytelling component, that need for listening, and sort of getting very, very focused, creating those barriers, right? Of this is what I'm going to let into my life. This is what I'm going to let into the messaging, this brand piece, this campaign, but also this is what I'm going to let into the agency. This is how who we're going to work with, and setting those having some sort of a boundary, a truth filter to discern this is what we do and this is how we do it, rather than trying to be all things to all people, which rarely works out very well. So.
Very true, very true. You'll be up at 3 a.m. and you'll achieve nothing. Okay.
Yeah, fantastic. It's a big dilemma, but yeah, very interesting. The more focused we get, the easier things. It just simplifies everything. You actually scale and grow and get better at doing what you're doing. So very, very important stuff. Thank you so much. It really appreciate your perspective on all of this, and I'm sure everyone listening at home got a lot out of it. Thank you so much for dropping by. Jane, thanks for being here. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks.
Thank you.